Good evening, Father Matt Williams here. I apologize for the late evening post as I was helping out on the leadership retreat for the Hunger for Justice service retreat that'll be coming up during the Easter Triduum. When the Lord called his people Israel, he first established a covenant with Abraham. And we know that Abraham was the father of Isaac, who was the father of Jacob, and from Jacob came the 12 tribes of Israel. And we know that the Lord gradually revealed himself and created a people that would be uniquely his own. In the first reading today from the book of Exodus, we have the giving of the law to Moses. And the law was meant to be a tutor, was meant to be an instruction for his chosen people on what it means to be a godly people, of what it means to be human, of what it means to be a people uniquely his own. And Israel's responsibility was to be faithful to the covenant. When Moses came down the mountain, it says that he had 2 tablets. And the church has always viewed the 2 tablets as the first 3 commandments which pertain directly to God. And the second tablet, the other 7 that have to do with our relationship with one another, with our neighbor. God and neighbor. And if you read throughout the Old Testament, you'll find that so often God's holy people fell into worship of pagan idols. They broke the very first commandment of the 10 commandments. A lot of times it happened when they intermarried with other nations and they adopted the pagan practices. They forgot their identity. Imagine this, right? That the God of the universe reveals himself. He makes himself known to Moses, to Abraham, and he shares his heart with them of what it means to be human, what it means to be a people uniquely God's own. And they feel like they're missing out. They look around at all the pagan nations all around them, and they feel like they're missing out. They feel like there's something that they have that they don't. And so they go searching, and they end up worshiping false gods and practicing the ways of the pagan gods, which ultimately never leads to happiness and only leads to misery. Worship is so important if we wish to keep our identity of what it means to be human, what it means to be people of God. In the gospel today, Jesus goes and he cleanses the temple. We read from John's gospel in chapter 2. And what ends up happening is when Jesus goes up to the temple, he enters the court of the Gentiles, which is the outermost court. And this place was a place for the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, to draw close to the temple as seekers, as people who were kind of on a quest wanting to know, what is this temple worship about? It was an opportunity for them to ask questions and to learn about the law of Moses. What this turned out to be, as we know from what Jesus says, is it turned more into a marketplace where they were exchanging money so that they could pay the temple tax, where they were selling animals for the sacrifice. And what ended up happening was corrupt business practices. They would charge far more than what was owed in order to make profits. And this marketplace took over. God's very holiest place, the place where God dwelt in his name and in his power, was turned into a marketplace. They forgot the very meaning of why this place is sacred and holy. And they turned on themselves and were just focused on making profits. And Jesus, which the scripture says that zeal for his house consumed him, in just anger, throws over tables and makes a scene, making a statement that his Father's holy place, his house, has been turned into a den of thieves. He's trying to send a statement about restoring the order of worship. Brothers and sisters, in my experience, my humble 9 years experience of a priest, it always begins when our fall down the slippery slope always begins when we stop going to Sunday Mass, when we stop worshiping God, when we stop having a vibrant prayer life every single day. Once we compromise on the Sabbath day, when we stop to worship God and make him first, what ends up happening is that a small little crack on the door opens, or a snowball on the top of a mountain begins to come down. And what happens is it catches momentum. And before you know it, one Sunday turns into 2 Sundays. Before you know it, we start compromising in our beliefs and our moral system. And before you know it, we end up so far away that we start living for ourselves. I'll never forget when Father Tom preached the homily at my first Mass. He said this. He said, if the priest does not fall in love with Jesus, he will fall in love with something else. And that's really true. That the priest will fall in love with something else. And the same, if it's true for me, it's true for you as well. Let's be honest. If we're not falling in love with Jesus, we will fall in love with something or someone else. Nature abhors a vacuum, but our hearts are restless until they rest in him. And Jesus is calling us to order in the gospel today. He's calling us to restoration, to place God first in our lives, to make Sunday a true Sabbath day, to worship God with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength and body, and to make prayer a priority every day of our lives. The question that I think you and I have to ask today is that if Jesus doesn't come first in my life, then what does he come after? What does he come after? We have to ask that question. I hope that we, during this Lenten journey, can have a significant conversion experience where we make him number one in our lives. For he gives us the commandments, which teach us what it means to be human, which means loving God above all things. And he teaches us by this cleansing in the temple that we need to have our priorities straight, putting God first, and then he gives us everything else as blessing. Please continue to pray for me as I pray for you. I want to give a shout out to all of my friends from the Hunger for Justice Leadership Retreat. And I'm just so excited about the great things God is doing in and through our young people in the Archdiocese of Boston. God bless you. And until tomorrow, have a good night.